CFL 110, your weekly trip around the biggest stories in the Canadian Football League with Jeff Hamilton and Andrew Hustler Paterson. Presented by Garage Living Winnipeg.
Hey, what's going on, folks, and welcome to another edition of CFL 110. Andrew Paterson, Jeff Hamilton with you here on the Winnipeg Sports Talk channel and wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Great to have you with us. A big week of action heading into the August long weekend. We're going to be all over it, coming out of Week 8 in the Canadian Football League and heading into Week 9 with all the top stories. And, of course, Winnipeg Sports Talk and CFL 110 is brought to you by our great friends at Garage Living Winnipeg. Gang, if is your garage a mess, you're having a tough time opening the car door because of all the clutter, Garage Living can certainly help and help you transform that cluttered garage into a beautiful, clean, functional garage that looks amazing and adds value to your home. Garage Living Winnipeg specializes in stunning polyaspartic floor coatings, high-end made-in-Canada metal cabinets, slat wall and overhead storage solutions. Give our pal Pat Kanuga a call for a free in-garage consultation to let you know what is possible with your space to completely revolutionize your garage at 204-999-1234. Pat's been a vintage car guy for decades. He knows garages, and whether it is the 10-car garage mahal or a single-car garage in the back lane, Pat can come up with a design to meet your needs. Check out their work at garageliving.com and give Pat a call, 204-999-1234. Now scheduling installations into September, so the sooner you can get together with Pat and get that project on the move, the sooner your garage can be completely redone in time for the fall and winter. Garage Living Winnipeg, proud sponsors of CFL 110, garages made for living. All right, let's get the hammer in here and get the show on the road. How are you, pal?
Good, man. Just like anybody else in this province, just trying to combat the heat. Was at bomber practice today, was in the shade, and then did interviews in the heat. And actually, Stanley Bryant did me and him both a solid by letting us do it inside. So it's that time of year in Winnipeg. I'm not going to complain. Want to keep it around for as long as possible. We know once we hit August, we're hitting towards school season, and the rest is downhill from there. But still plenty of good weather ahead of us and plenty of good ball played behind us and ahead of us. How are you doing?
Of course, I'm doing great. I mean, I'm looking forward to this game tomorrow between Winnipeg and BC to get things going. But to start off the rundown, let's talk about a game that I will say still from a gambling perspective, I'm still outraged. Saskatchewan plus 3.5, up 13 at the half, going to the third string quarterback. Cash the tickets, folks. Not so fast. Enter Davis Alexander, who was simply brilliant. Coming off the bench, completed his first 12 passes, touchdowns on the first 2 drives, completely flipped that game. The Alouettes defense stepped up, didn't allow a point in the second half. And the Alouettes, most importantly, win, but unfortunately for me, also covered, winning by 4. What an incredible performance by Alexander. And now the question, with Cody Fajardo potentially returning this week, do they have a new guy there in Montreal to potentially go in for Cody Fajardo? But bottom line is, he salvaged a win that looked like was not happening 30 minutes into the game.
Haas, it sounds like you're lucky, though, man. Usually when you see the third string quarterback come out in the second half, you don't cash in your tickets, you double down your tickets. So, so it's probably a good news for you. Also good news for the Montreal Alouettes. Look, there's not going to be a quarterback controversy anytime soon. Cody Fajardo, this is his team. He's the leader on and off the field. Everyone follows him. We all saw what he was able to do last year, particularly in the playoffs. This is his team. Enough said there. That being said, what a way to find out what you have in your third string quarterback. And I say that because those opportunities don't come around all that often. And when they do, you need to show up. I mean, they brought in Caleb Evans, right? A guy that has experience, a guy that you knew was going to be the backup plan if Cody Fajardo went down, a guy who started games, last season for Cody Fajardo while Davis Alexander was in third and got them 2 victories in the 2 games that he played. So, you don't really know what you have in your third guy. You like him. Your scouts really like him, right? Because they bring him into training camp. He shows well in training camp. They look good, and you hold on to him. Getting him minimal reps in practice if he even gets that many reps. And then when you have to throw him to the Wolves, you hope that all the learning and planning and all the feelings you felt about him pan out. And in way more instances than what we witnessed this weekend, usually it's kind of like a wah-wah, and the guy struggles naturally, might get another chance, might not. In this case, Davis Alexander took the ball and ran and threw and won with it in this case, and in a way that we haven't seen many quarterbacks just come in and do. And so, the crazy part too is, Huss, is if he comes in and lays an egg here, they probably have their answer on him. He's been around the last 2 seasons. This is his 3rd year in Montreal. You got to make the most of it. And wow, did they ever. Not only, do I think that opens the door for certainly more opportunity, he probably leapfrogs Caleb Evans. And if Cody Fajardo can't play this weekend, he is back. He's been taken off the 6-game injured list. It's likely he will play, but if for some reason he has a setback, we are talking about a hamstring here, right? If we have a setback here this week, I think Davis Alexander did exactly what he needed to do to earn, what would be his first CFL start if Cody Fajardo can't go this week.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. I mean, in professional sports and professional football in particular, at the quarterback position, opportunities are not guaranteed. And when you are where he was on the depth chart, you don't know when that chance is coming. And man, did he make the most of it. And, if you saw at the end of the game too, pretty emotional interview afterwards, making the most, but also giving a shout out to his father who's battling cancer. But David Alexander, certainly breakout star of the week in the Canadian Football League. Listen, I don't need to tell you that around here in the middle of the country, Bomber fans, I imagine most of the Bombers and the staff too are scratching their heads as to how they came out of Toronto with a loss. This is a bizarre football game, Jeff. They put up 400 yards of offense. They only allowed 200. They allowed 6 points defensively in the football game and managed to lose. And, you look through it. I mean, the defense played, they back-to-back 2 really strong games where they did everything they could to give their team a chance to win. And the Bombers, despite moving the football as well as they did, committed 5 turnovers, including 3 key fumbles by veteran players and a pick 6, albeit controversial one, that ended up going back the other way, combined with a terrible time for Sergio Castillo to have his worst game. A somewhat controversial call late going for it on 3rd that stymied the Bombers. And this team is 2-6 on a short week with 1 day of practice now with the BC Lions coming off a bye. It just seems like it's going from bad to worse, despite as competitive and how much in all of these games the Bombers have been.
It might be going from bad to worse to even worse now that the Bombers have the BC Lions up on deck now 2 games in a row. But before we move too far ahead, Huss, I mean, it says something that, you're calling this game wild. I mean, I feel like every single CFL game has an element of chaos to it. This might have had all of them, as you said. I mean, the 3 fumbles, it wasn't just 3 fumbles. It was 3 fumbles from 3 veteran players, and Nick Dembski, who fumbled for the 2nd time in as many weeks. Brady Oliveira, who is usually pretty good with that, secures the ball well. He fumbled. You have Drew Wolotarski taking, on the receiving end of an absolute punishing hit that has landed him on the 6-game injured list. Him losing that ball, all of which were in scoring positions. As you mentioned, that pick 6, controversial, if you will, probably should have been called pass interference on that play. Wasn't. That's a big mood changer in that game, breaking over, I think it was a 6-6 tie at that point. Yeah. And then the Bombers gambling on 3rd and 1 on Toronto's 22-yard line with less than a minute remaining. I mean, those aren't just 5 giveaways. Those are 5 critical giveaways, and add them all up, and there's not many teams that can survive it, and certainly not this outfit here, Huss. I mean, that to me, of all the elements of that game, I mean, what did you think was What did you think was the determining factor? What did you think was the end-all, be-all for this club?
Well, it was the turnovers. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I believe.
Which one? Like, is there a particular one that bothered you? Is there a particular one that you felt like? I mean, the turnovers are the story.
Well, the Dembski and the Brady, like this, and the Wolitarsky one, I kind of feel like that was like the Dembski fumble in the game against Saskatchewan. Like the one that happened in the Saskatchewan game was as brilliant a defensive play as you'll see from Thurman, grabbing on one side, doing the punch on the other. Sometimes great players make great plays, and I'll chalk that one up to this. The Wolitarsky hit was just an absolutely hellacious hit. It's knocked him out of this week's action. He's on the 6th game, and that will happen. But both
likely to be on all of that. Like, I don't see an early pull-off for Drew Wolitarsky either.
Yeah, but listen, Dembski and Brady Oliveira, arguably the two most important guys in this offense right now with Kenny Lawler out of it, are leaned on to produce, and both of them fumbled at the end of big plays. I mean, and both were well into the scoring zone. If they just go down and they get nothing on the first 2 drives or the next 2 plays, they're kicking field goals. So I think that, and it took a lot of steam out of the team because of how well they were moving the football. You watch the first half and go, wait a second, how is this team only up 3-2, or how is it 3-3 in this football game? So all of that, I had no issue with the going for it in the on third down late in the fourth quarter. I thought that was the call. In fact, I would have thought that it would have been borderline cowardly not to do it with the success that they've had at how confident they are in Chris Streveler to get that yard.
For 18 at that point.
Yeah, and for the record, I thought he got it. Game. But you know what? When you put it into the hands of the officials, sometimes it can't go your way, and he does it. And then a shockingly poor game by Sergio, who had been great so far. But to me, the guys they need to ride right now with these other guys out, Dembski and Brady Oliveira, they just can't have those mistakes happening. And I think that almost set the tone for the rest of the game, is as well as they played in a lot of ways, especially on the defensive side of the football, self-inflicted mistakes prevented them from doing it. And it's a complete 180 from everything that we've seen from this team in the last 4 years, Jeff.
Absolutely. I mean, that's when everything goes wrong in one game, it tells you, are the Bombers cursed? I mean, we were asking about that with the Elks as they were trying to search for as they continue to search for their first victory. But it just seems like with 13 guys now on the 6-game injured list, that's the highest amount in the league. Kind of reminds me of the Calgary Stampeders last season when they were, sending a new guy to the 6th game each season, and they still made the playoffs. It's 6-12. They edged out the Rough Riders, who lost their last 7 games to punch their ticket into the playoffs. So I mean, I don't think that's the blueprint that the Winnipeg Blue Bombers want to follow, but it might be the blueprint they have to. I mean, this is a team that is sticking with their guns. They're not bringing a lot of guys in. We will see Lucky Whitehead this week finally after almost 4 weeks with the team learning the offense. We still don't know what the status of Rasheed Bailey is. We'll get into that, but you have Patrick Neufeld now on the 6-game injured list. We'll see how long he lasts there. I don't know if he'll last the full 6 games. He was kind of the good news of the 2 injuries between him and Wolitarsky after that game. But this is tough sledding for this group, and and that. Neufeld being out as well. I mean, that's the part that we haven't even talked about, and that probably rounds it all together, is the play of the O-line. I mean, the play of the O-line is the personality of not just the offense of this team. And, the offense was able to put up a lot of yards. Zach Collaros eclipsed 300 passing yards. They, as you mentioned, they were able to move the ball down the field. But, when push came to shove, Zach was still being chased for his life. He got sacked 5 times, and it's
4 times without blitzing. I mean, that was the most concerning. Yeah. I mean, it's one thing, when you've got sending a bunch of extra guys, you'll have that opportunity. When everyone is covered and they're getting into the backfield immediately, I mean, it is problematic. And to be honest, I think Zach played a hell of a football game. I mean, for him to put up the numbers and move the football as well as they did with the amount of pressure they had on him said something. But again, once they completed the passes, there was some key drops or keep putting on the carpet to turn it around, and it was ugly. Listen, moving on to Bailey, and you mentioned Sheed. I mean, hand up. The second I heard that he was released by the Argos, I thought there might be a press release 10 minutes later by the Bombers that he was back with the club. I wouldn't have been surprised if he'd started last week. I'm frankly stunned that he hasn't been signed yet, and looks like going into this game, that won't be the case. What are you hearing? What's the latest? Why isn't Rasheed Bailey a Bomber right now with the injuries they've had and now the new injury to Drew Wolitarsky?
Yeah, well, first off, I'm with you. I had just arrived in Toronto for the game late Thursday, and I was hearing rumblings that Rasheed Bailey was no longer on the team. I thought that I was going to see a press release that he'd signed with the Bombers before I got off the train into the city. So, didn't see that. And not, in hindsight, not overly surprised that a move wasn't made early on, in the sense that they were playing Toronto that weekend. They wanted to focus on Toronto. They didn't want, I imagine they wouldn't want a signing to create a distraction throughout the weekend. But the other thing too is that, I thought was funny and would have been so CFL. There was no chance that he was walking across the field and into the Bombers locker room to play this past weekend. So anyone who had those kind of ideas, that wasn't going to, which would have been awesome, which, it just, not a Mike O'Shea coach team, not at all, but definitely not impossible. So I think I'm not pushing against any fans who thought might have been a possibility, but yeah, I didn't think that was happening. It certainly isn't. But now, Huss, fast forward to now Wednesday, and Rasheed Bailey doesn't have a contract, including here in Winnipeg, and I don't know why. I honestly don't know why. They reached out to. Well, I kind of do know why. Mike O'Shea makes the decisions on this team, and I think as of right now, he's happy with who he's got. They've been in contact. Kyle Walters has been in contact with Bailey's agent. They know, there's obviously mutual interest there. You'd think that, Bailey, while not exactly the league's best route runner, is a reliable target, brings the experience that we hear talked about by not just Mike O'Shea, but every coach across the league, how important that is to have on your roster. He brings the biggest thing I would argue he would bring is to the run game, and adding, almost like a sixth O lineman when it comes to the trenches and blocking. I don't think there's a better receiver when it comes to blocking than Rasheed Bailey. And then the stuff he brings into the locker room, right? It's not been a great scene in Winnipeg. Losing does that, no doubt about it, but it hasn't, I think these guys could use an injection of a Rasheed Bailey, and anyone that knows Rasheed knows, the kind of person he is, the perspective he brings. He's a high energy guy. He pulls guys along with him. You'd think all those things that would be something the Bombers would want. The only thing I can think of as maybe a caveat, and I'm not even all that confident with it, to be frank, is that, maybe they're waiting, maybe it's a salary cap thing, and they're waiting to the end of this week and bringing them in over the bye week when they have a real chance to think about, what their roster is going to look like. I mentioned Lucky Whitehead's getting into the game. How might his performance this weekend affect those things? We'll see. But Kenny Lawler is also expected to be back after the bye week for that BC game. So maybe that's playing a factor. But for a team that's got 13 guys on the 6-game injured list, I have a hard time thinking this is a salary cap issue thing, and I have a hard time thinking that they couldn't use a guy who had at that point 2 receiving touchdowns, and the Bombers had 3 passing touchdowns. Now they have 4, but that seems, all things considered, seems like an obvious one that isn't quite coming the way I think a lot of people thought.
It's surprising. What a big part of the team he's been for the last few years. In addition to what he does as an outlet for Zach Caleros, but the contributions he makes to the running game. I'm sure Brady Oliveira would be a very happy guy if Rasheed Bailey showed back up in blue and gold. So we'll stay on that, but it is a little surprising that we didn't see a move. And as you mentioned, Lucky Whitehead gets his first chance to return to the starting lineup. Wouldn't be surprised to see him get a little bit of return action as well, as they look to get something out of that part of the game.
Those duties with Cody Case for sure.
Hasn't been there. Let's move on back out to the East. And by the way, big win for the East. I don't know when the last time the East went 4-0 head-to-head against the West, but it hasn't happened very often in the last decade or so. But don't look now, but the Ottawa Redblacks are 5-2. And listen, I know they had a couple wins against Edmonton. They squeaked one out against Winnipeg. But we were really wondering, like last week, we always joke on the WST about the litmus test. It seemed like that was sort of a litmus test. What's Calgary going to look like, coming off that big win against BC, going on the road where they hadn't been good? And, is Ottawa for real? What could they do? This was a massive game for Drew Brown, who's had a real solid start. 30 for 37, 325 and a TD. And just, you put it, a complete ass kicking from start to finish. Good mojo around Bobby Dice and the Red Blacks right now. And you can critique how close the games were, whatever you want. They've got 5 wins. And I can tell you here in Winnipeg, people would love to be having that conversation. Are they as good as their record? Because the record's pretty damn good and their quarterback's balling out.
Yeah, you gotta love it when you're, when your team is 2-5. You talk about how it could easily be, 4-3, and then when you see another opponent who's 5-2, you go, well, look at their schedule. They could easily be 3-5, or whatever, 2-5.
Guess what? They're not.
Well, they're not. And I mean, as you mentioned, I think we might have to check the receipts. I believed in Drew Brown and the Red Blacks more than Calgary. And I'll remind you, this is 2 teams that I've seen up close, both home and away in Ottawa. Obviously Winnipeg losing in Ottawa, but winning at home with Strevler. And then, of course, same story with Calgary. And I've had a similar feeling about them, just kind of good, but are they good? But then you start seeing, Drew Brown get more comfortable within that offense. You see them get, move the ball around. We saw Dominique Rhymes kind of come out of his shell a couple weeks ago. They're waiting for Dedmon to come back, but, they got this Khalil Pimpleton, who's come out of absolutely nowhere. Who could use a Khalil Pimpleton right now? The Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I mean, they do have one in Ontario Wilson, who's been playing pretty well, but this guy is lighting it up as well. And, added to his arsenal by returning a ball back 99 yards for a touchdown. I know the Winnipeg Blue Bombers would want a piece of that. But, this is, I see more mojo with this team. I see too many inconsistencies in Calgary. And that's why I said, check the receipts. I believe I was all in on Ottawa in that game. And sure enough, we saw that, man. And I mean, what's crazy too about it, Huss, is, they lost their running back like a couple minutes into the second quarter when Raquel Armstead got tossed for his second objectionable conduct, or his second misconduct penalty. And so they had to play with, Braylon Addison as their running back for the most part for a large part of the last 3 quarters of the game. So, who knows what's going to happen here? But I've said this on the show before. Even when they beat the Bombers, early on in the season, it's good for the league for Ottawa to be a good team. That's a market that was, when they came back, they were bumping. They have a young audience, a lot of energy at their stadiums. But after a few years here with playoff-less football, there's not been a lot to cheer about. But I know it's early. We're still not even halfway through the season, but those good feelings are important in Ottawa. And as I've said a few times on this show, obviously, we saw Drew Brown here in Winnipeg. He's such a great guy, great person, great perspective. That's a tough ask for him week in and week out. It was last week that Jeremiah Masoli got healthy. He's itching to get back in. I mentioned Tyree Adams, Dustin Crum, both guys in the quarterback room who have gotten starts with this team. To see Drew Brown continue to play at the high level that he's playing in, I mean, I'm starting to understand fans a little bit now. When I still wouldn't have picked Drew Brown over Zach Collaros, not in a million years. But I do see some of the arguments now from those fans. What are you seeing from Drew?
Hey, listen, we're seeing him make the most of his opportunity. And to your point, I mean, that's a very packed quarterback room, and unlike a lot of other quarterbacks, he wasn't going to be given the leash to struggle for a week. He had to come out and get it done right out of the gate, and he is doing it right now. And the weapons, I mean, this Khalil Pimpleton, first of all, arguably the best name in the CFL, and there's some beauties. But he's been just an impact player since, getting into the lineup. And, week after week after week, I kick myself for not putting him in my DraftKings lineup when we do the contest every week. Listen, I think Ottawa, are they as good as 5-2? Whatever. We'll see. They got 5 wins. And, they have benefited from doing the right things in crunch time and allowing teams like the Elks and the Bombers to beat themselves. And I'm happy for Ottawa. I think their fan base deserves it. They've supported that team well during these last few years where they really have stunk. And it seems like there's a bright future right now. And the East is on the rise overall. 12-6 against the West this season. As I mentioned, 4-0. And part of that is the resurgence of the Hamilton Tiger Cats, who have now won 2 games in a row.
Hey, Huss, I got to interrupt you quickly because I just can't lose it. I have to say it because it happened today. When it comes to nicknames, so I'm at Bombers practice today. We'll get to the Ticats. We'll get to the crummy Ticats soon, or the resurgent Ticats. We were asking questions about who would be the best athlete at Olympics for certain whatever and blah, blah. And they kept on saying hot plate, hot plate, hot plate, hot plate. I'm like, who the hell is hot plate? And they're like Devin Adams on the D-line. I go, finally asked Stanley Brown, I go, why do you call him hot plate? And he goes, because he's Little Stove Richardson. So they call him hot plate. Anyways, I feel like that couldn't be lost in all this. This needed to be brought into play just because of how funny that is with nicknames. But hot plate as Little Stove Richardson.
I am all in on that nickname. Nice to see some creative. We're around too many hockey nicknames, which are just adding a Y or an SY to the end. That's the way it's done, folks. A nickname like hot plate. The Hamilton Tiger Cats are hot. They're cooking right now. They crushed the Edmonton Elks and the final, and we'll get to why that final looked a lot better than it really was in a minute. But they've now won 2 straight. They're 2-5 on the season and right back in it, although, as I mentioned, a very, very tough and more competitive East Division than we've seen in a long time. Are you buying or selling the resurgence of the Hamilton Tiger Cats, Jeff?
I'm not buying it right now. I can't. I mean, Edmonton is so bad, and they look even worse since Chris Jones. I mean, we'll get into why there might be hope, but they looked horrendous early on. I just felt like, Edmonton's not a good team. They're not. You can't say you're back in a victory over an Edmonton team that hasn't won all season. And when you look at their other game, they, narrowly beat a Toronto team at home, a Toronto team that I witnessed firsthand this past week against the Bombers, and they're not good either. So it's, it's funny because speaking of receipts, you could probably pull up 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was talking about how the Argos looked really good with Cameron Dukes and how I like their defense and stuff like that. But just those, just watching the way they're hurting right now. I mean, they're going through some injuries as well in Toronto. So, Hamilton beating up on 2 teams that don't look that great. A team that narrowly beat the Bombers, despite all the errors that Winnipeg had. I'm not buying it yet. That's not to say that they're not in a much better situation than they were in 2 weeks. As you can tell, they've climbed, as crazy as this might sound, back into the playoff picture in the CFL. Like they're not, they're a couple more weeks like this, even one more week like this, and they'll be right back in there. So good news for Hamilton. It was tough sledding there. Scott Milanovic wanted a lot more out of his first year as head coach. From what I gather, he can be a pretty feisty guy. So losses exactly probably don't create the best environment over there. We've seen some real change with the coaching staff. We've seen a lot of things happen. Obviously, Paul Boudreau lost his job early in the year, special teams coordinator. Not a lot has been going right in Hamilton, so to see some things going right here, that's certainly a good step in the right direction. And you want all teams to be competitive, and that includes the Edmonton Elks. They got to get back in here too. It's a 9-team league. You can't have 2 or 3 teams hovering around 0-2 wins. There needs to be. We've talked a lot about parity, and ironically, there is a lot of parity this year because the high end isn't as, the gap at the top isn't as wide as it has been in a few years. But that basement dwelling, I'm not buying the Ticats right now, but I'm willing to buy them if they can continue to play like this and carve out some victories.
I'm a lot higher on Hamilton than you are.
Nice.
And to be honest, I remember talking with you in week 3 going like, this Hamilton team should be 2-0. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between Hamilton and the Bombers this year. And early on in the season, I mean, in particular, Tim White and the rest of the receivers could not catch a cold. I thought they should have beaten Calgary in week 1 if the receivers could have just held on to the football.
Right.
They're starting to do that right now. And listen, Bo Levi Mitchell has actually looked really good. I couldn't believe, I was talking to Dusty on the Lock Shop earlier this week. He had to double check when the CFL stats guy in the TSN booth said that this was Bo Levi's first ever 5-touchdown game. When you think of the incredible success he's had in this league with those high-powered Stamps offenses, it seemed hard to believe, but that was it last week. He's starting to feel it. Listen, Are they a great team? No. But I don't think they were as bad as their 0-6 record showed early on, in comparison to the next team we're going to be talking about for a minute. So I think they've got a little bit of momentum. I think Milanovic is getting some more belief within that group. And listen, we all know in the Canadian Football League, you will go as far as your quarterback takes you. And I'll tell you what, Bo Levi Mitchell's given some glimpses of the old Bo right now. And for everyone that said that he was done, I think he's got some answers for that. So I'm looking forward to this game against Montreal. I mean, especially it becomes a lot more difficult, I think, with Cody Fajardo coming back if he's good to go. But this is going to be a big test this week. We'll see. Like, they may not win the football game, but if they can be tight, if they can be competitive against the class of the East right now, I think I'll be high that we'll see a very exciting race going through the second half of the season in the East for playoff spots. And again, that hasn't been the case in the last number of years. There was 2 winless teams. The Ticats finally got off the mat, and then they got win number 2 against the Edmonton Elks, who have just gone from bad to worse to disaster to calamity. I don't know what's next, but we do know that there is a little bit of a difference right now. It's the Tre Ford show. And he came in, albeit down, 43-8, something like that in the fourth quarter. He showed some of those glimpses of greatness that we'd seen in spots in the previous 2 seasons. I know my friends in Edmonton what do they have to lose at this point? I mean, at least it'll be entertaining if they lose football games, but it sounds like it's Tre Ford's time to show what he can do. Where are you at on the Elks, and does this even matter?
Well, I am on. Well, of course it matters. I mean, will it matter by the end of the season? We'll see. I mean, this is. I'm trying to think of back to last year when they finally pulled the cord on Taylor Cornelius, right?
Well, they were 0-9.
They were 0-9 exactly. So it's a little bit early. So I think you can take consideration. I think that can be viewed as a positive. Look, I'm coming at this from a few different angles. One, I'm on record saying that I thought it was a smart idea for them to bring in McLeod Bethel-Thompson in the offseason. I thought that he would bring some consistency to the position, some leadership, some maturity, things that I think that, Tre Ford had some of, but probably needed, could have used the mentor. And when McLeod Bethel-Thompson came in right away and was like, this, he didn't say that he didn't say this is Tre Ford's show. He certainly didn't say that. He knew it was his show, but he was really excited to work with Tre Ford and mentor him and talk about how many great years in this league that this kid could have. And then kind of to see the relationship. I'm not in that room. I don't cover the Elks, so I'm not going to make this argument that there's friction. But to hear, last week or 2 weeks ago, McLeod Bethel-Thompson talking about Tre Ford coming in and ruining his rhythm. Tre Ford never even got another snap after that. And it was both series were in the first quarter. And then, to see kind of them just finally throw the keys to Tre Ford and say, hey, man, see what you can do with this. And for him to score 3 passing touchdowns in the final quarter to make it a respectable. I don't know who was hammering the Elks when it came to live betting on points or whatever, but Tre Ford certainly helped you out. You could have gotten a large margin there. But I also and this isn't a but, because it's not a but you can see why some coaches are like, oh, he's so athletically gifted that it's almost like, don't even give the guy a playbook. Just hut the ball to him and let him deal with what comes to him, and he'll find someone eventually. If he needs to run 65 yards behind the line of scrimmage to get a guy open, he'll do that, and he's skilled enough to do it. So I also kind of want to say that I'm with that group of people that, although they like McLeod Bethel-Thompson, I was wrong in saying that this guy shouldn't have got a shot, because you can look at what he did in one quarter and you can talk about prevent defense. They weren't, it was garbage time. There's no doubt about it. They were sending the house at him. They knew that they were going to, their best bet was to force him to throw the ball. So it wasn't your typical prevent defense, even if it was garbage time. But, Zach Collaros had 3 passing touchdowns, right now in his, the entire season. He had 3 in the third quarter. In the fourth quarter of that game. And so you have to, they will be starting Tre Ford, but you have to ask the question, what would have happened if Tre Ford would have started, they didn't spend what would have been upwards of $500-something thousand on McLeod Bethel Thompson if he played all season. What could they have done with that money? And more importantly, what could they have done with Tre Ford there? The one thing I will say, Huss, and this is a complete side note, I'd love your take on this. What I didn't love about Tre Ford's performance over the weekend was, I know it was a quick camera shot. It wasn't very long. And I don't know if you would have seen it. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Was Tre Ford jaw-jacking the defense on Hamilton when he was scoring those touchdowns? Because that just was like, because I just kept seeing one of the guys D-line, I forget who it was, just giving them the L, like the loser sign, because they were losers, because they were gained in their face. And that, to me, like, I'm glad, you want to see energy from Tre Ford. What he's doing was incredible, but I think you want to pull back a little bit of the cheering in a game that you still lost by multiple scores.
Yeah, time and a place. Listen, I thought it was a great move to bring in McLeod Bethel Thompson, and to be honest, at times I think he's played well enough to win. I mean, the Elks are the perfect example. We've talked about the Ticats and the Bombers finding ways to lose. No one has perfected that art more than the Elks over the last number of seasons, but same old this year.
Let me put this to you on Rourke. Do you think, because he's up, his contract's up, his rookie deal's up. Do you think
Tre Ford?
Yeah, Tre Ford's deal's up. So, like, do you think the Elks can re-sign him? Do you think he would want to re-sign to the Elks? What do you think it would take?
It all depends, because, listen, Jones just got fired. I mean, we'll see whether Jarius Jackson is going to be, like, listen, if he goes in and starts the second half of the season.
Nobody coming back. All coaching staff's gone. No one from previous year.
I think it will be a possibility. It all depends on what happens in these final 11 games. And who knows whether he even holds the job going forward. Like, I know he looks spectacular at times. I do also think that there's some things lacking in his game. Sometimes his decision-making over the last few years hasn't been where you want it to be. And listen, one thing that is not an issue, certainly here in Winnipeg with leadership at the quarterback position, I think is there. Like, there's been plenty of stories as to how Tre Ford got in this situation. I mean, dating back to last year's training camp when, he showed all those glimpses of stardom at the end of the season and then was the third string quarterback. Like, I'm not sure he's done all the right things in handling himself the way you need to earn the trust of the coach to basically be the CEO of the offense going forward. Yep. And I think if he had done things a little differently, he probably gets this opportunity earlier. I mean, right now it's rock bottom. They have no other choice. They're just going at it with him. I think there's a maturity level that maybe has improved. Like, we'll see what he makes of this chance. The MBT side of things, though, like, the way that he's ranted against the league and complained against the schedule and done all this, I mean, put it this way, you're not hearing any of that in Winnipeg, as bad as it is right now with players like Zach Collaros. So there's a lot of things lacking in Edmonton. But I think from the quarterback position, MBT has come up short in some areas that you need a veteran quarterback to lead the way for a team that has been struggling and to find their way. And I'll tell you what, as much as Tre Ford is going to end up on some highlights this week, I do think the jury's out as to whether he can be a guy that will, in a lot of ways, be able to give you the sort of consistency and leadership you need from a quarterback. But the bottom line is, for the Edmonton Elks right now, it can't get any worse. They were 0-9 last year. They're 0-7 this season. Commonwealth Stadium is empty. They're going to be sold to a private owner. And again, so much of this goes back to Chris Jones and this Chris Jones era that has been one of the biggest disasters in CFL history, to the point that the Elks are changing an ownership schedule or ownership structure and moving on. So in the short term, the CFL needs Edmonton to get back to being a healthy franchise, one of the jewels of the league. And we'll see whether Tre Ford can at least give people some hope moving forward. But unfortunately, these are the exact same conversations we were having in the second half of last season and the season before under Chris Jones. So I'm sort of with you, Jeff. We'll see what Tre Ford's going to have the opportunity to show that he can be a starter in this league. It's up to him what he does with it. And at the end of this season, they probably blow the entire thing up. And If there's a new guy that believes in Tre Ford, maybe they do keep him. But honestly, they're going to go scorched earth, I think, on this roster with whoever takes over from a football ops perspective.
I think so. I mean, I think at this point, you know, I'm less about the roster. I think you can look at the roster, try to identify, you know, guys that you think are leaders, you know, do your exit interviews, if you will, and determine who you want to be back. But I think you got to get rid of the whole management. You know, I think you need to bring in, kind of do what you did with Chris Jones. Don't give one guy all the power. Try to bring in just, you know, try to do what Saskatchewan's doing. Try to find your Corey Mace, essentially. There's someone who can bring in a new culture, new expectations, and get rid of the stink from the previous years. And, you know, whether or not Tre Ford's part of that equation, I think he'll have a lot of people interested in his services. And whether or not he's your bona fide number one quarterback next year, I just think it is a shame to have somebody as athletically gifted as Tre Ford is to not be on the field. Like, you know, and, you know, we talked about it last week about him turning down certain packages. Sounds a lot like he was probably offered the short yardage stuff and whatnot. And, you know, whether or not, you know, that's true that he turned it down, there's got to be different reasons. We don't know what's exactly going on in there, but this is a guy who, you know, can do what he did regardless of the situation in the game. He's that gifted. He's that athletic. You know, it would just, you know, I think at this point in this season, you need to develop him. I think you need to look at Tre Ford and the rest of this year. Yes, those guys are trying to make the playoffs, but the reality is you know, it looks like Tre Ford could be your best option to make the playoffs, to win games, just like he was last season. So, you know, whatever the goal is, and that's the problem here, Huss, too, right? Is that if you're a Jarius Jackson, right? Jarius Jackson didn't just come on the scene after Chris Jones was fired. He was the offensive coordinator. He had a say in whether or not Tre Ford played. He's been in the room. It's not like Chris Jones is going over to him and being like, you can't play Tre Ford, you know, like it's his decision too. So at this point, you know, is it about self-preservation, you know, for that coaching staff and making the playoffs, you know, and what they think is fit? Or, you know, look, Tre Ford's getting the start this game. So let's, you know, I think if you're the Edmonton Elks, whether you're the coaching staff or a player, you're taking it week by week, game by game. Tre Ford's starting this game. Let's see what he can do, and we'll have the conversation next week on how he performed. But
yeah,
if he performs anywhere close that he was in the fourth quarter, man, that's, you know, who knows what we're talking about.
Well, listen, you know what? Do that against the Rider defense as opposed to the Ticats in garbage time, and that will certainly get my attention. One guy that has everyone's attention is Nathan Rourke, for obvious reasons, released by the New York Giants from a situation where he was not going to get any chance. And now he's apparently working out for the Falcons, which is maybe the most bizarre team in the entire league to be working out for right now. A situation where they just dropped $140 million on Kirk Cousins and then inexplicably drafted Michael Penix Jr. 8th overall in the draft. This does not seem like a spot where there's a lot of opportunity for Nathan Rourke. How do you see this moving forward? How do you see this playing out over the course of the next 2 months, I should say, as we get into NFL season and into the stretch of the CFL season? And what do you think the chances are on a CFL return, and if so, when?
Yeah, so, you know, as far as Atlanta goes, we'll see what happens. You're right. It doesn't look like from the outside or even from the inside that looks like an ideal destination for him. Doesn't look like a lot of opportunity. If you couldn't get in with New York, you know, chances are you're not getting in with Atlanta. And chances are, you know, you're probably looking at a team. Who knows, man? I mean, what is the ideal situation for Nathan Rourke right now? That's the big question here. You know, I think a lot of people look at what he did with the BC Lions, you know, a few years back and see a guy who, you know, they believe is just unbelievable and that he should be at the very least a backup quarterback, you know, if not starting somewhere maybe. I just, you know, he's going to have to play the long game. He's already in the middle of playing the long game, whether it was starting with Jacksonville, moving over to New England, joining the New York Giants over the offseason and then getting cut out of camp. I mean, that's just kind of the life of a quarterback trying to make it. So, you know, I look, Nathan Rourke is 26 years old. He turned 26 in May. It's not like he's turning 27 this year. He's not super young, but he's definitely not old. And he's going to exhaust this NFL opportunity like anybody else in his position would. I just, you know, for me, it's you know, his dream is to play in the NFL. You know, he wants to keep trying. He's made some money over time, so it's not like he's broke. It's not like he's not making bank. It's probably comparable to what he'd be making in the CFL. Now, the question has on when and if he comes back to the CFL. What he should do, I think he should hold out and wait and see what the NFL has to offer. Again, I mean, but what about coming back to the CFL and doing what he did in the one season that he really got an opportunity to play? If people aren't noticing him, if he's not, if his name's not being floated around, and we all know every year, Huss, is just a new draft class of quarterbacks, a new group of quarterbacks. We all know the politics that exist, in the NFL. And if you're a draft pick versus you're, from a school that, or you weren't picked, you have to have a guy in your corner. You need to shine. I mean, we saw, it's not a great comparison, but it's not a horrible one. We saw Chris Streveler have one of the best preseasons that a quarterback can have. Now, does he have the raw skills like Nathan Rourke? No. And did Nathan Rourke perform in the preseason? Absolutely. He had a highlight reel play that I don't think a lot of NFL quarterbacks in the league today could probably pull off in a game. I don't care that it was in the preseason. But it's still not a team, much like you have Chris Jones not wanting to gamble on Tre Ford for his CFL coaching job. Now factor that in if you're an NFL coach. You don't know much about Nathan Rourke. He's a good kid. He's had some great, stats and play in the CFL, but are you making him your number 2? Are you making him your number 3? I think for Rourke, he's going to have to try for that 3rd spot, move up to 2nd, and hope for an injury. And you need luck, man. I don't care how good you are. You need luck when you're in the position that Nathan Rourke is in. As for coming back to the CFL, that's a fascinating question. How much longer is he going to be willing to ride this wave? Is it going to be a year? Is it going to be next season? Is it going to be a few years? How late into his career without getting notable playing time is he going to be willing to go? I'd argue probably maybe another year. And he might not have that choice if things don't work out for him in the next year or so as he gets into his late 20s. So, but the big question is where does he show up if he does get to the CFL?
Listen, I'll touch on that in a second. I see this playing out as he works throughout this season to see if he can get an opportunity to a place that may realistically have him on the roster with some potential path to playing time, or at least significant practice reps, the ability to work your way up the depth chart. If that doesn't happen this season, and again, we've seen a ton of serious journeyman quarterbacks get signed midway through the NFL season. So to just pack it up right now, I don't think it's going to happen. I wouldn't recommend it happening. But if he goes through this entire year without either getting a sniff or getting signed to a practice roster and just being a bit part or an extra player, to your point, there's another draft class coming in next year. It becomes more difficult, frankly, to do it. And 100%. You're more and more removed from playing at a really high level. So I see this year as the crucial year for a legitimate NFL opportunity for Nathan Rourke. And if that doesn't happen, I think this offseason we see a sweepstakes for a free agent in the CFL unlike one we've ever seen. And you bring up where he might end up. I mean, I think if it were his choice, he just goes back to BC. They've got a guy that's doing a hell of a job right now as well. And maybe, he was so popular, he was so dynamic, maybe they see this as an opportunity to get him, and then they've got a heck of a trade chip in Vernon Adams. Although I'm not sure what Vernon's contract situation is at the end of the year.
A couple more years, I think, actually. At least one more.
The most interesting spot is Winnipeg. Zach Collaros has 1 year left on his deal. But as we all know, these aren't ironclad contracts. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers are arguably the healthiest team business-wise in the Canadian Football League. And let's not forget, they're hosting the Grey Cup next year. And if they think that this window of the Zach Collaros era is behind them through this season, I would not be surprised to see Winnipeg be a big, big player in it. The Argos are another team. Love to have this big star in Toronto, maybe get a little bit more light on them. We know the Chad Kelly situation is very up in the air. as to what happens when he returns. So that is another very intriguing spot. And who knows what happens in Edmonton? I mean, you've got a new owner coming in there. You want to make a splash and try and get some fans back and completely erase the stench of the Chris Jones era? Sign Nathan Rourke. So to me, there's plenty of intriguing possibilities and no shortage of checks that'll be thrown at Nathan Rourke if he decides he's coming back north of the border.
Every single team could use Nathan Rourke, including the BC Lions. In fact, I would argue if Nathan Rourke comes back to the Canadian Football League, whenever that may be, whether it's in the midst of Vernon Adams in a MOP caliber season, Amar Doman will not allow Nathan Rourke to leave BC without signing a contract. He's a kid from Vancouver. He's a clean kid. He's not going to bring you issues. He's marketable. He's a hell of a football player.
He's a stud.
He's just a stud. He will make your team significantly better. Now, there are issues, of course. You talk about bidding wars. And, I've listened to other podcasts and talked to other people. Like, what do you think? How do I want to? How crazy do you think a team could get? So if they really, if their CEO or their owner was like, here, just go get them. What do you think it would take?
I mean, it probably takes more in some spots than others. But listen, I mean, I could see this being $750,000. I could see it starting with an 8
minimum.
I'm not sure it could get up to 7 digits.
750,000 contracts. You've seen those already. Bo had one a couple of years ago when things got wild. Mike Riley had one in Vancouver for $800K. What was it? Or what it ended up being like 2 point something, whatever it was, million. They put the 3-year contract. The CFL made a big deal about it because they don't ever show contracts. And so they're going to show Mike Riley and BC and blah, blah, blah. Nathan Rourke is way better than Mike Riley. Maybe not in his prime, but certainly up there.
Well, more marketable
right
too.
now.
Like I think he sells you more tickets too. Like
but
I think you could
people are
justify
talking about
that.
$1 million. So let me just say it out loud as we wrap this pod up. Can you see him? Like, look, the salary cap it's not the NHL. It's not going up by a significant margin. That is a large amount of money to put into your quarterback. Would you do it?
Hey, if you don't have a quarterback, you don't have a chance to win. So if you're telling me I have to pay that much for Nathan Rourke and I got to figure it out with some cheaper players elsewhere, I would take that as opposed to thanks but no thanks and go in with maybe a deeper team, but without a quarterback that I think I can win with.
Here's why I think it hits up towards 8, 9, maybe, $1 million's crazy to me. If we saw that would be incredible. I don't think I imagine that. But if you're getting up towards 859, got to remind you, marketing money is now big time in play here. So teams don't have to be salary cap strapped by it, right? I mean, you look at Chad Kelly, he's making the most in the CFL right now. He makes $100,000 of his yearly contract for marketing money. So you can, I don't believe.
What a waste that is. Who's marketing Chad Kelly right
100%.
now? You want to talk about a sunk cost.
I know there's a floor. I don't believe there's a ceiling. Now, of course, you have to take into consideration what money you're making, what you have in the coffers, what you can spend. But in that case, I mean, I'm not trying to add fuel to the fire here, but Winnipeg would have some money. And I mean,
Winnipeg and Saskatchewan, I think marketing wise,
for sure. But Amar Doman's got money in his pockets. You know what I mean? Like he won't. I just think that's the place to be. It's nice to dream. I will tell you this. I believe every single team in the CFL is called Nathan Rourke, including Winnipeg, including everybody else in the league, just to find out where he's at. People don't want to be in the dark when it comes to Nathan Rourke. So we'll see what his future looks like here. But I'm with you. I don't think we enter this craziness until next season.
They're not losing that number anytime soon. Hey, speaking of football, international football, shout out to the Canadian women on the soccer pitch. Incredible performance against all odds, sweeping their group play at the Olympic Games and living to see another day. Our focus, though, tomorrow, Winnipeg and BC. BC right now, just do a quick look at the Coolbet lines before we head out. BC is now 4.5-point favorites. We saw this line. It's been moving all day. BC, the Bombers were a plus 143 money line dog yesterday. It's now plus 170, and the Bombers are getting 4.5 points. And I think people are paying attention to that injury report that just came out with Wolotarski and Neufeld out. 5 points for the Alouettes, expecting Cody Fajardo back as favorites.
Keon
on the
Hatcher
road
coming
in
back for
Hamilton.
BC too. Keon Hatcher's back.
Riders, 5.5 point favorites against Tre Ford and the Elks. And the Stamps, back at home where they're undefeated as opposed to on the road where they're winless, 3-point favorites against the Toronto Argonauts. Jeff, great stuff as always. Enjoy the game tomorrow and the action on the weekend. And I look forward to getting back together with you next Wednesday for another edition of CFL 110. Again, huge thanks to our great sponsors at Garage Living Winnipeg. Check them out online at garageliving.com about what they can do for your space in your garage to revolutionize the area and add value to your home. And give our pal Pat Kanuga a call, 204-999-1234 for more information and a free in-garage consultation. We'll see you at Princess Auto Stadium, Hammer. Thanks for doing this.
You got it, my friend. Take care.
See you next week on next Wednesday on CFL 110 right here on Winnipeg Sports Talk. Tell a friend.
You've been listening to CFL 110. Tune in next week for more great Canadian football discussion.